The planet was silent except for the faint hum of the wind through jagged rock formations. Captain Elias Ward had never seen a place so hostile, so alien, and so quiet. He stumbled across the uneven terrain, every step deliberate, every movement calculated. The air was thin but breathable. Still, it carried a strange tang, a sharp scent that made his throat burn slightly. He glanced back over his shoulder. There was no sign of the ship that had brought him here, no trace of his team. It had all gone wrong in an instant. The moment he had stepped out of the transporter, a group of beings had appeared. They were enormous, towering over him with elongated limbs and faces that were sharp and fluid like carved crystal. Their eyes glowed softly, intelligent and cold. One among them stood out immediately, a figure taller and more magnificent than the rest, radiating authority and power. This was the Queen. He could feel her presence before he saw her clearly. Her gaze settled on him, and it felt as though she could read his mind, weigh his thoughts, and understand the truth of every fear he tried to hide. "You are far from home," she said, her voice not loud, but somehow it resonated deep inside his mind. It was not spoken aloud but transmitted, as if it came from somewhere between his chest and his skull. Elias swallowed hard. Words failed him. He had faced hostile forces before, but never intelligence like this, calm, observant, and absolute. The Queen circled him slowly, each movement deliberate, each step measured. Her attendants flanked her silently, their eyes never leaving him. Elias tried to remember his training, his years in Space Command, all the tactical preparation he had been through. Yet here all that seemed insignificant. The human mind was simple compared to what he faced. And yet perhaps that simplicity was why he was interesting to them. "You are alive, yet you do not belong," the Queen said. There was a strange curiosity in her tone. Elias felt no malice, only a piercing intelligence examining him like a specimen. "Do you understand why you have been brought here?" I don't." Yet even as relief began to wash over him, he knew better than to relax. "Do not mistake release for freedom," she added. Her attendants shifted slightly, a warning that the Queen's attention was never far from him. The pathway they had guided him to was strange, smooth stones that seemed to grow naturally from the jagged cliffs, glowing faintly in the dim light. Elias walked carefully, each step echoing slightly in the cavern-like landscape. He dared not look around too much. His survival instincts screamed that the Queen's observation was not casual. She wanted to see him act naturally, to see how a human responded when unobserved, or at least when the illusion of being unobserved was given. It was then that he saw it. Small at first, almost imperceptible in the distance. A figure crouched behind a rock formation, watching. Unlike the Queen and her attendants, this one was smaller, fragile-looking, almost childlike. Its form was delicate, with luminous eyes that mirrored curiosity rather than authority. It was strange how human the figure seemed in its movements, tilting its head as though studying him in the same way a child might watch a stranger. Elias froze, not wanting to startle it, not sure if it would attack or flee. He took a cautious step forward, and the figure mirrored him almost immediately, keeping its distance. Then something strange happened. He swore he heard a sound, not a language he knew, but a soft, repeating call, a pattern that somehow felt like his name. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Could it really be calling him? Elias forced himself to breathe steadily. The Queen had let him go, yes, but he was still in her domain. Every instinct screamed that this was a test, that nothing about this place was accidental. He crouched slightly, hands visible, signaling he meant no harm. "It's okay," he murmured. His voice sounded small in the vast emptiness, but the figure tilted its head again. Its eyes seemed to shine brighter, like it was trying to understand him. Elias continued, slowly moving forward, each step calculated. Survival here was not about strength. It was about observation, patience, and empathy. He remembered stories from Earth about humans being underestimated by creatures far stronger or more intelligent. Yet here now, he felt the truth of it. Being underestimated could be a gift. He had survived worse, and he would survive this. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted on this alien world. The figure continued to follow, always at the edge of visibility, never approaching too closely. Elias used the environment to his advantage, keeping cover behind rocks and natural formations, testing both his own limits and the reactions of the childlike alien. He noticed its fascination with simple actions, how he used a stick to balance himself, how he moved over uneven stones. It mimicked in its own way the gestures he made. By the time the dim light of the alien dusk began to glow across the landscape, Elias realized something remarkable. The Queen had released him, but she had done more than that. She had sent this child, this observer, to follow, to learn, to connect. She had created a bond, perhaps unintentionally, but a bond nonetheless. The thought was both unnerving and strangely comforting. He found a small alcove between two jagged stones, a place to rest for the night. The alien child remained in the distance, watching silently, waiting. Elias knew he could not sleep deeply, not here, not with the Queen's reach still extending over him. Yet he allowed himself a few moments to close his eyes and gather strength. Survival demanded calmness, clarity, and careful planning. As night fell, the planet's sky revealed stars unfamiliar to him, stretching across the heavens in patterns that made no sense on any star chart he had ever studied. He felt both small and extraordinary at once. Humanity had reached far into the cosmos, and yet here, on a world ruled by beings of impossible intelligence, a single human life felt simultaneously insignificant and incredibly important. The alien child stepped closer, hesitating at the edge of the alcove. Its glowing eyes reflected the starlight, and Elias noticed a flicker of something familiar in them, curiosity, wonder, and perhaps even longing. He whispered softly, "You don't have to follow me. You can go back." Elias realized that the Queen's tests were not only about him. She was observing how humans influenced others, how they could change the thoughts of beings unlike themselves. Elias spent the night thinking, planning, and observing. He reflected on humanity's greatest strengths: ingenuity, adaptability, and the ability to empathize, even with creatures utterly foreign to them. That ability, he realized, might be what kept him alive in this strange world. The Queen had released him, yes, but she had left him with an observer, a witness, a link to something larger than survival. When morning came, Elias stood at the edge of the cliff overlooking the strange terrain. He felt no fear, only a cautious determination. He knew this journey would not be easy, that every step might be observed, every choice analyzed. But he also knew something else. Humans were unpredictable. That was their power. That was why he had been allowed to leave. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows behind a rock formation, the child alien mirrored his stance, its luminous eyes fixed on him, calling silently, perhaps for the first time in its life, something that sounded like a name. Elias took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the small pack he had salvaged from the crash, and stepped forward. The Queen had let him leave, but the journey ahead was only beginning. He would survive, he would understand. And in the quiet, watching eyes of the alien child, he sensed that he might not be alone in this struggle after all. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying an unspoken warning. This world was alive, intelligent, and patient, and so was the Queen. Elias would have to be smarter, faster, and braver than ever before. But he was human, and humans, when cornered, when underestimated, had a way of turning even the most impossible situations to their advantage. The path ahead was uncertain, but Elias moved forward with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death before and come out stronger. He had no choice but to keep going, to survive, and to uncover the purpose behind the Queen's test. And somewhere in the distance, the child alien ran silently, its luminous eyes never leaving him, whispering his name in a way that promised that the story was far from over. Elias moved carefully through the alien landscape, each step deliberate, his senses alert to every sound and movement. The terrain was uneven, jagged rocks stretching toward a sky colored in strange purples and blues. Plants with translucent leaves shifted as if alive, responding to the faint wind that blew across the ridges. He could feel the planet itself watching him, a quiet intelligence that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He had no map, no way to predict what lay ahead. The transporter that had brought him here had left no trace behind, and his ship was nowhere in sight. Yet he pressed forward, guided by the faint instinct that somewhere beyond the ridges lay a safe place, a chance to rest and plan his next move. And always in the distance, he saw the small figure, the child alien. It moved silently, keeping just far enough to be unseen if he looked directly, but close enough to track his every step. Its eyes glowed softly in the dim light, a mirror to his own curiosity and wariness. Elias had long ago stopped wondering why it followed him. Now he accepted it as part of the challenge. He crouched behind a cluster of crystalline rocks, observing the child carefully. "I don't know what you want from me," he murmured under his breath. The child tilted its head, watching as if it understood the words. There was a spark in its eyes that reminded him painfully of something he had lost. A child of his own, back on Earth, now gone forever. The memory struck him sharply, stirring emotions he had tried to bury. He shook his head, focusing on survival. Emotions could be dangerous here. The child mirrored his pause, mimicking his cautious movements. Elias realized that the alien was not merely following, it was learning from him. Every careful step, every glance, every silent breath was being observed. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but they were also observant. He wondered if that was what the Queen had wanted all along, not just to release him, but to see how a human influenced another being. As he moved along a narrow ridge, the wind carried a strange scent. Elias inhaled carefully. The air was thick with alien minerals and the sharp scent of plants he could not identify. He used his training to navigate the ridge, testing the strength of each foothold. Beneath him, the drop was terrifying, but his mind stayed clear. Panic would be lethal here. Hours passed. Elias had learned to move quietly, avoiding the few visible predators that prowled the alien landscape. Most creatures were small and fast, scuttling between rocks, but one large shadow had passed nearby, forcing him to freeze completely until it disappeared. He realized that staying calm, observing, and predicting behavior was more useful than weapons or brute strength. Humans had survived against far larger forces before, and he intended to do so again. During a short rest, Elias crouched behind a jagged rock formation, pulling out the small rations he had salvaged from the crash. As he ate, he watched the child from a distance. Its small form was still, eyes glowing faintly. And then again he heard it, a soft, repeating sound that felt like his name. Not words as humans knew them, but a sound pattern that resonated in his mind. It was calling him. Elias froze. He knew this was dangerous. The Queen had not simply let him leave. She had placed this observer here for a reason. And if the child could call him in any way, it might be able to guide others, warn the Queen, or alert predators. He needed to understand it quickly. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm. The child tilted its head again, stepping slightly closer. It mimicked his breathing, slow and measured. Elias realized something remarkable. This alien was beginning to trust him. It was learning, observing, and perhaps even connecting with him. He had seen similar patterns in humans with animals, but never with beings so foreign. The thought gave him hope. Humans were adaptable. Humans could influence even creatures far stronger or smarter than themselves, not through force, but through understanding, patience, and empathy. That, he realized, was a strength the Queen could not ignore. He began testing the child slowly. He moved a small stone forward with his foot. The child watched, then nudged a similar rock with its own foot. He smiled faintly, encouraging it. Slowly, cautiously, he taught it small gestures, demonstrating simple actions. Every time the child copied him, Elias felt a spark of pride and relief. If he could communicate even in the simplest way, perhaps he could influence it further or use it to his advantage. The day passed with little incident, though Elias never lowered his guard. He noticed subtle signs of tracking, small disturbances in the soil, bent plant stems, marks in the stones. The child was clever, but the Queen's influence was everywhere, watching, testing. He knew he could not underestimate this. As evening fell, the sky deepened into darker shades, and the terrain became more challenging. Elias found a narrow canyon that offered some shelter. He climbed carefully down, moving rocks to test stability, using every ounce of his knowledge to avoid a fall. The child followed, stepping lightly, observing, never rushing. Elias realized it was learning not only from him, but from the environment itself, absorbing lessons in ways humans would recognize as intelligence. Night fell completely, and the alien sky shimmered with unfamiliar constellations. Elias had made a small fire using his portable kit, though the flames were weak against the vast darkness. The child remained at a distance, watching silently. Elias felt a strange kinship growing between them. He remembered his own child, and a pang of longing stabbed through him. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. Survival first, emotion second. "Why are you following me?" he whispered softly into the night. No reply, but the soft glow of its eyes felt like a response. He decided to test it again, extending a hand slowly. The child hesitated, then mimicked the gesture with a smaller, delicate hand. Elias allowed himself a small smile. This was progress. Trust had begun. Communication, even basic, was possible. Sleep came in short bursts. Elias kept one eye open, wary of predators, wary of the Queen's reach, wary of what might be waiting beyond the canyon. The child did not sleep, remaining near the entrance, a silent guardian or observer. Elias realized he could not think of it as merely an alien. In some ways, it was a student, a witness, a partner in survival. That thought was comforting, though dangerous. Attachment could be used against him. Morning came slowly, the sky glowing with alien light. Elias felt rested enough to continue, and he carefully packed up his meager supplies. The child mirrored his movements, watching intently, learning. Elias moved cautiously, keeping to the edges, testing the terrain. He discovered a narrow ridge that offered a path forward, safer than the canyon floor. He led the way, the child following, silent and attentive. As they moved, Elias began to notice subtle intelligence in the land itself. Rocks that shifted with the wind, plants that reacted to movement, paths that seemed almost designed for observation. This world was alive, yes, but also intelligent, perhaps even sentient in ways humans could barely comprehend. The Queen had chosen her planet wisely. Every step he took was observed, every decision weighed. He remembered Earth's greatest explorers, those who had survived impossible odds through cleverness, patience, and courage. That human spark, the ability to adapt, to learn, to use intelligence over strength, was exactly what had brought him this far. He had survived alone on hostile planets before, outsmarted predators, and learned quickly. And here now, on a world that seemed alive with danger and intelligence, he was still moving forward. The child ran ahead briefly, then stopped, looking back at him with luminous eyes. It called out again, the same soft pattern, repeating a sound that felt like his name. Elias' heart tightened. The Queen had placed more than a test before him. She had placed a connection, a link between him and her child. This was no accident, and he understood finally why she had let him leave. Humans were unpredictable. Humans inspired loyalty, fear, curiosity, and trust in ways even the most intelligent alien could not fully control. The Queen had underestimated him once, perhaps, but she had also given him an opportunity. And Elias, human through and through, intended to use it. He allowed the child to run closer, moving to the edge of a small plateau overlooking a vast valley below. The wind was stronger here, but Elias did not flinch. He reached out slowly, letting the child approach. It paused, then stepped forward, a small hand touching his lightly. The sensation was electric, not dangerous, but a reminder that connection, trust, and understanding were forms of power, sometimes greater than brute strength. Elias whispered softly, "Stay close, but trust me. You're safe with me." The child's eyes glowed faintly, as if acknowledging the words, repeating the soft call again, something like his name, something like a promise. Elias realized that whatever the Queen intended, the child was no longer a mere observer. It was a participant, and now it had a choice. The journey ahead would be perilous. The Queen's reach was long, the planet full of dangers, and the rival factions of her court would notice quickly if the child became attached to him. Yet Elias felt a confidence he had not known in years. Humans survived against impossible odds not because they were the strongest, but because they were clever, adaptable, and resilient. And now, with the child at his side, he felt something new. Hope, trust, connection, and the spark of something extraordinary, a chance to turn the Queen's test into a triumph, a chance to survive, and perhaps even to teach her child what it meant to be human. Together they moved forward into the alien valley, the unknown stretching endlessly before them, a vast landscape of danger, mystery, and discovery. Elias led the way, careful but confident. The child followed, learning, watching, and perhaps understanding. The planet's silence was no longer oppressive. It was alive, yes, but it had met something it did not expect, a human. And the human was clever, determined, and unyielding. The journey had only begun, and already the story of Elias Ward and the child of the Queen had taken its first true step into legend. Elias led the child through the valley cautiously, every step measured. The terrain was rough, covered in jagged stones and twisted alien plants that seemed to sense their movement. Strange lights flickered in the distance, reflected in pools of water that shimmered with colors he could not name. The air was heavy with the scent of minerals and something sweet, almost like earth flowers, though sharper and sharper. Every breath reminded him how far he was from home. The child followed silently, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, occasionally making the soft, repeating sound that felt like his name. Elias had begun to respond to it, answering with a low murmur or a gesture. Slowly, a connection was forming, fragile but unmistakable. He paused at the edge of a small cliff, looking down at a valley below. Strange creatures moved among the rocks, small, swift, and seemingly harmless, but Elias did not trust appearances. He crouched and motioned for the child to stay behind him. Carefully, he studied the movements of the creatures. Their gait was patterned, predictable, like a complex algorithm running in the wild. Yet humans had a way of seeing patterns in chaos, and he began to spot gaps and flaws. "This way," he whispered to the child, pointing to a narrow passage between rocks. The child mirrored him, stepping lightly, its luminous eyes focused entirely on him. Elias realized the queen had given him more than a test. She had given him a puzzle, and he had the tools to solve it. As they moved through the passage, the child stopped suddenly, tilting its head. Elias froze. He followed its gaze and noticed a thin, nearly invisible line of energy running along the rocks, a tracking device of some sort, subtle but unmistakable. The queen was watching, as he had suspected all along. But now he had an advantage. He had learned to read the environment, to anticipate traps, to think like the aliens themselves. He crouched and reached toward a rock, tapping it lightly. The line of energy shimmered, then dispersed. Elias smiled faintly. "We are smarter than they think," he whispered. The child stepped closer as if to affirm his words, and Elias felt a rare warmth in his chest. It was not just survival anymore. He had a companion, someone who could learn, adapt, and perhaps even help him navigate this alien world. Hours passed as they moved cautiously through the valley. Elias taught the child small lessons in observation. He pointed to shadows that could hide predators, to plants that could signal danger, to rocks that could serve as landmarks. The child mimicked every movement, learning quickly. Elias realized something extraordinary. The child was not just intelligent, it was capable of human-like reasoning. It could observe, imitate, and even anticipate. At one point, they reached a river with water so clear it reflected the alien sky like a mirror. Elias knelt to drink and motioned for the child to do the same. The child hesitated but then imitated him, lowering its small, delicate hands to the water. As it drank, Elias observed the subtle movements, the way it balanced, the care it took not to disturb the surface. The child was learning not just survival, but patience, observation, and caution, the qualities that humans had mastered over millennia. As they rested by the river, Elias spoke softly. "You're not like the others, are you? You think for yourself, you learn, you choose." The child tilted its head, eyes glowing brighter, and made the soft, repeating sound again, as if answering. Elias' heart ached. He had lost his own child on Earth, and in some strange, impossible way, he felt a connection to this alien being that went beyond survival. Suddenly, movement in the river caught his eye. A predator, long, thin, and covered in scales that reflected the alien light, slid silently through the water toward them. Elias grabbed a stick and waved it cautiously, making a low noise. The creature paused, assessing him. Elias had no weapons, only his wits. He realized that humans had always survived not because of strength, but because of intelligence, adaptability, and courage. He moved slowly, using his knowledge of the environment to guide the creature away. Rocks clattered, creating sounds that confused and distracted it, and eventually it retreated into the shadows. The child watched closely, learning. Elias noticed subtle movements, almost imperceptible adjustments it made as it mirrored him. It was not instinct alone, it was reasoning. He felt a surge of pride. This was exactly what the queen had wanted, he realized, to test him, to see what humans could teach, and perhaps to see what could happen when humans interacted with her kind. Night fell again, colder this time, and Elias found a small cave for shelter. He built a tiny fire with what little he had, careful not to make it too bright. The child stayed outside, watching silently, but close enough that he could see its small form glowing faintly. Elias knew he could not fully trust the child yet, nor could he ignore the lessons it had learned. Humans had always survived by balancing trust and caution, and he would need to do the same here. He spoke quietly, recounting stories from Earth, of survival in deserts, jungles, and frozen wastelands, of humans outsmarting predators far larger and stronger than themselves, of the cleverness that had allowed them to explore the stars. The child listened, tilting its head, making soft sounds that seemed like questions or curiosity. Elias realized that even across species, stories had power. Humans had always used knowledge to survive, and perhaps now they could teach it to another kind of being. The following morning, they moved again, heading toward a distant plateau Elias had spotted. The journey was treacherous, filled with loose stones and narrow ledges. The child followed, adapting quickly, sometimes stepping where Elias had not expected it to, using balance and observation that reminded him again why humans were clever. Even in the face of danger, humans and those who could learn like humans had an advantage: the ability to adapt, to see patterns, to innovate. As they reached the plateau, Elias noticed something startling. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, glowing faintly. They pulsed in rhythm with the soft wind. Elias crouched, observing them carefully. The child stepped beside him, mimicking his posture. He realized the symbols were not just decoration. They were a form of communication, perhaps a warning or a guide. Humans had always survived by noticing details others overlooked, and he intended to use that skill now. Carefully, he traced the symbols with his finger. The glow shifted slightly, as if acknowledging his touch. The child made its soft sound again, almost like encouragement. Ilias understood. They were learning together, adapting and communicating in ways neither species had fully mastered before. Humans survived through creativity, observation, and cooperation, and that spark was alive now, bridging worlds. They camped on the plateau that night. Ilias studied the alien sky, noting the constellations, the movement of moons, and the faint glow of distant storms. He reflected on humanity's greatest achievements: exploration, innovation, empathy, and resilience. These traits had allowed humans to survive against impossible odds. Here on this strange planet, those same qualities were keeping him alive and teaching another being, the child, what it meant to think, to learn, and to trust. As he drifted into a light sleep, Ilias felt a strange comfort in the child's presence. It was no longer just an observer. It was a partner, learning from him, responding to him, and slowly forming its own understanding of the world. The Queen had released him, yes, but in doing so, she had created a living experiment. And Ilias had become more than a participant. He had become a teacher, a guide, and a survivor. The soft sound of the child calling his name echoed faintly in the cave. Ilias smiled, realizing that this bond, fragile and impossible as it seemed, was exactly what would see them through the trials ahead. Humans survived not because they were the strongest, but because they were clever, adaptable, and willing to connect, even across worlds. The night passed without incident, and as dawn broke over the alien plateau, Ilias prepared to continue. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the ever-watchful presence of the Queen. Yet he felt something unshakable. Humanity had a spark that no alien intelligence, no matter how vast, could fully predict. And with the child by his side, he was ready to meet whatever came next. Together, they moved forward, one careful step at a time, navigating the strange valley, learning, observing, and surviving. The child stayed close, responding to his gestures, repeating the soft call that had become both a warning and a comfort. Ilias knew that their journey was far from over. The Queen's tests were still in motion, and the child's presence was both a gift and a complication. But for the first time since arriving on this world, Ilias felt a certainty he had never known. Humans survived because they refused to be predictable. They survived because they could think, adapt, and connect. And in teaching this alien child, he had found not just survival, but purpose. The planet stretched endlessly before them, full of dangers and mysteries, yet Ilias moved forward with calm determination. The child mirrored him, learning, adapting, and trusting. And somewhere, perhaps watching from the shadows, the Queen observed, intrigued, and aware that humans were far more than she had anticipated. The journey was only beginning, and already Ilias felt the unmistakable truth of being human. Even in the face of overwhelming intelligence and danger, creativity, courage, and empathy could turn the impossible into survival, and survival into triumph. Ilias and the child moved cautiously through a narrow canyon, the walls rising high on either side and casting long shadows in the dim alien light. The air was heavier here, thick with the scent of minerals and something faintly sweet. Every step made a soft crunch against the alien soil, and Ilias' eyes constantly scanned for movement. He had learned that in this world, intelligence and observation could be just as dangerous as strength. The child followed closely, stepping carefully and watching his every move. Ilias had begun to teach it not just survival, but judgment. He showed it which rocks were safe to step on, how to recognize the sound of shifting predators, and how to move silently to avoid drawing attention. The child learned quickly, anticipating his movements and sometimes adjusting its steps even before he had made them. Ilias marveled at its intelligence, realizing the Queen had created not just an observer, but a being capable of learning, reasoning, and forming attachments. "Stay close," he whispered, pointing to a narrow ledge above the canyon floor. The child mirrored him instantly, eyes glowing faintly. Ilias had come to understand that trust was a two-way street. The child trusted him, yes, but he also had to trust it, to rely on its judgment and instincts. Together they were stronger than they could be alone. As they climbed, a sudden shift in the shadows caught Ilias' eye. Figures emerged from the darkness, tall, elegant, and unmistakably alien, yet different from the Queen and her attendants. Their movements were precise, almost ceremonial, but Ilias could feel the tension in the air. These were not observers. They were hunters, members of a faction that sought to challenge the queen's authority and enforce their own rules. Elias froze, signaling the child to stay low. The hunters moved swiftly, scanning the canyon floor, their eyes glowing like twin stars in the dim light. Elias realized immediately that confrontation was not an option. Violence would be fatal. Instead, he relied on his training and human ingenuity. He whispered to the child, "Follow me exactly. Copy my steps, don't rush, and watch the shadows." The child nodded in its own way, stepping in perfect synchronization with him. Together, they moved silently along a narrow ledge, using the canyon walls for cover. Elias had learned long ago that humans survived not by matching strength with strength, but by thinking, observing, and adapting. This was another test, and he intended to pass it. The hunters paused briefly, scanning the canyon floor below. Elias held his breath, counting slowly in his head, timing every movement. He shifted slightly, causing a small rock to tumble and clatter. The hunter's attention snapped toward the sound. Elias froze, then subtly nudged the child behind a rock just as the hunters turned back. By the time they had resumed their patrol, Elias had moved farther along the ledge, the child following perfectly. Hours passed with careful movement, and eventually the hunters gave up, retreating into the shadows from which they had appeared. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. The child looked up at him, eyes glowing faintly, and made the soft, repeating sound again. Elias smiled faintly. In that sound, he heard recognition, understanding, and perhaps even gratitude. They pressed on, climbing higher along the canyon walls. The terrain became more challenging, with narrow paths and jagged rocks threatening to give way underfoot. Elias moved deliberately, testing each step, balancing carefully. The child mirrored him perfectly, adapting to the terrain with remarkable skill. Elias realized that humans had always survived through intelligence, observation, and cooperation. And now he was teaching those same skills to another being, bridging worlds in ways the queen could not have anticipated. As they reached a plateau, Elias noticed a faint glow in the distance. It was the signature of the queen's presence, an observation device perhaps, or a controlled energy field meant to track movement. He gestured for the child to remain hidden, studying the pattern. With careful planning, he found a way to navigate the area without triggering it. Step by step, they moved through the glow, Elias using his understanding of patterns and timing to outmaneuver the technology. By midday, they reached a small clearing with strange plants that shimmered in the alien sunlight. Elias knelt to examine them, noting their structure and texture. The child crouched beside him, mimicking his gestures. Elias smiled faintly, realizing that the child was learning not just survival, but observation, reasoning, and the ability to understand cause and effect, the very traits that made humans remarkable. He spoke softly. "See this? The way the plant bends when the wind hits it tells us which way the wind is moving. That can signal predators, changes in temperature, or danger. You need to notice these things." The child made a soft sound, tilting its head, and Elias knew it understood. Humans survived because they observed, reasoned, and learned. Now he was teaching those skills to an entirely new species. Suddenly, a low vibration ran through the ground. Elias froze, listening. The child tilted its head, eyes glowing brighter. He realized it was sensing the approach of something larger. From the shadows emerged a massive predator, its skin glinting in alien light, eyes fixed on them. Elias did not panic. Instead, he analyzed the creature's movements, timing, and likely behavior. He noticed subtle gaps in its gait and used rocks and shadows to create obstacles that would slow it down. The child watched closely, learning. Elias led it along a path that minimized exposure, using strategy rather than strength. The predator followed, but its movements were hindered by the clever use of terrain. Eventually, it gave up, retreating into the shadows. Elias exhaled, realizing that humans survived because of creativity and intelligence, not brute force. The child's eyes mirrored his understanding, glowing faintly in recognition. As evening approached, they found shelter beneath a massive rock overhang. Elias prepared a small fire, careful not to make it too bright. The child sat nearby, observing. Elias spoke softly, recounting lessons from Earth about survival, problem-solving, and ingenuity. He explained how humans had navigated deserts, jungles, and frozen landscapes, how they had outsmarted predators, and how cooperation and observation had allowed them to explore the stars. The child made soft sounds, tilting its head as if asking questions or reflecting on what it had learned. Elias realized that this was more than survival. He was teaching the child not just to move, not just to avoid danger, but to think, reason, and understand the world. The queen had released him, yes, but she had unknowingly provided him with a chance to shape her child's understanding, to influence its perception, and perhaps to create an ally. Night fell, and Elias kept one eye open while resting. The child remained near the fire, glowing faintly. Elias thought about Earth, about humans' resilience and adaptability, and he realized that these traits were universal. Intelligence, empathy, creativity, and courage were not bound to one species. They could be learned, shared, and applied even across worlds. The following morning, Elias led the child toward a distant ridge, planning to gain higher ground and better vantage points. The terrain was difficult, but the child mirrored him perfectly, adjusting its movements based on his gestures and timing. Elias smiled faintly. Humans survived because they adapted, learned, and taught. Now he was demonstrating those same principles to another being, bridging a gap that the queen had never anticipated. As they climbed, the child stumbled slightly on a loose rock. Elias reached out instantly, steadying it. The touch was brief but meaningful. He whispered softly, "Trust me, you're safe with me." The child's eyes glowed brighter, and it made the soft, repeating sound again. Elias realized that the bond between them had grown stronger, built on trust, observation, and shared experience. Humans survived not just through ingenuity, but through connection. And now that principle extended beyond his own species. Reaching the top of the ridge, Elias paused to observe the landscape below. Faint movements indicated the presence of alien factions, hunters, or observers. He signaled the child to stay hidden. Carefully, he traced a path that would allow them to move undetected, using shadows, terrain, and timing to their advantage. The child watched closely, absorbing every detail, learning to anticipate challenges, and to respond with judgment rather than instinct alone. Elias realized something extraordinary. The child was no longer a passive observer. It was learning, reasoning, and adapting. Humans survived not because of size or strength, but because of creativity, intelligence, and empathy. Now, those qualities were alive in another being, one that could think, observe, and respond in ways humans could understand. As night fell, Elias and the child settled in a small cave, preparing for the next stage of their journey. The world was dangerous, the queen's reach extended far, and rival factions sought to interfere. Yet Elias felt a confidence he had never known before. Humans survived because they were clever, adaptable, and courageous. And now, he was teaching those traits to another being, creating a bond that could withstand even the queen's observation. Elias lay back, gazing at the alien sky. Stars unfamiliar to him glittered above, and the wind whispered through the canyon. He realized that survival was no longer simply about reaching the ship or escaping the planet. It was about influence, teaching, and connection. Humans had survived for millennia not just by surviving threats, but by observing, reasoning, and passing knowledge forward. And that spark, that intelligence, was alive now in the child alien at his side. The journey ahead would be perilous. The queen's presence, the rival factions, and the alien predators all posed threats. But Elias knew that humans survived by thinking, adapting, and connecting. He had proven that already, and he would continue to prove it. The child called softly, the repeating sound echoing faintly in the cave. Elias responded, a low murmur, a promise of guidance and of trust. Together they would face whatever came next, relying on intelligence, observation, and courage. The queen had underestimated humans once, but Elias intended to demonstrate the full extent of their resilience. The child would learn, adapt, and survive alongside him. And through that bond, perhaps humanity would leave a mark on a world that had never expected it. Elias closed his eyes briefly, feeling the quiet certainty of being human. Humans survived because they adapted, because they reasoned, and because they connected. And now those same principles extended beyond his species, bridging worlds and forging a path that no alien intelligence could fully predict. The canyon was quiet again, but the story was far from over. The journey continued, and with the child at his side, Elias moved forward, ready to face every challenge with the ingenuity, courage, and empathy that defined his species. Humanity had survived impossible odds before, and here on this alien world they would do so again. The plateau stretched before Elias like an endless ocean of rock and alien plants, glowing faintly in the light of twin suns. He paused at the edge, scanning the horizon. Somewhere beyond, the queen observed, patient and calm, testing him to the very last step. The child, small and glowing, remained at his side, mirroring his posture and movements. Elias felt the bond between them stronger than ever. It was not merely survival anymore, it was trust, understanding, and connection. "Stay close," he whispered to the child. It made the soft, repeating sound again, almost like affirmation. Elias knew the journey was approaching its climax. The queen would confront him soon, and he had no weapons, no reinforcements, only his mind, courage, and the spark of humanity. They moved carefully through a narrow pass where the rocks formed jagged walls on both sides. The air was thick, carrying the scent of minerals and a faint sweetness, almost like earth flowers. Elias adjusted his pace to match the child's, making sure every step was deliberate. They were moving toward the queen's inner observation grounds, the place where he would either face judgment or earn freedom. As they approached the entrance, figures emerged from the shadows. Not predators this time, but guardians of the queen, tall, elegant, and precise. Their eyes glowed softly, analyzing, measuring. Elias stopped, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. The child mirrored him, stepping slightly behind but staying alert. The guardians studied them for a long moment before stepping aside, allowing passage. Elias felt a mixture of relief and tension. They were getting closer to the queen, but every step had to be calculated. The path opened into a massive chamber, its walls smooth and glowing faintly. At the center, the queen awaited. Her presence was overwhelming, a mixture of majesty, intelligence, and quiet authority. Elias stopped, letting the child step beside him, both of them exposed and vulnerable. He did not bow or kneel. Humans had always survived by standing tall, by using courage and intellect instead of submission. The queen's gaze settled on him, and he felt the familiar weight of being observed, analyzed, understood. "You have traveled far," the queen said, her voice not spoken aloud but echoing in his mind. "And you have influenced another being in ways I did not anticipate." Elias kept his expression calm. "Yes," he replied. "Humans survive by learning and teaching, by observing, adapting, and connecting." "What do you want from us?" She did not answer directly, only studied him. The child shifted slightly, stepping closer to him, eyes glowing softly. Elias realized that the bond they had formed, trust, guidance, and mutual learning, was now undeniable even to her. A soft vibration ran through the chamber. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Elias recognized the pattern. He turned slightly to the child, gesturing with his hand. The child understood instantly, moving to the edge of the chamber, subtly signaling that it could follow his lead. Elias realized that the queen's tests were not about strength, but about adaptability, reasoning, and the ability to influence another being. Humans had always excelled at these qualities, and now they were on full display. The queen's attendants moved closer, circling them silently. Elias kept his focus, observing every movement. He noticed slight hesitation in their pattern, small gaps in their formation. Humans had survived impossible odds by noticing what others overlooked, and he would use the same skill now. Slowly, deliberately, he moved toward the far edge of the chamber, using subtle misdirection and timing to guide the child along. The queen's gaze followed, intense and unwavering. "You are clever," she said, her voice resonating in his mind. "Your species is unpredictable, and yet you survive. You teach another, and they learn. Why do you value this child?" Elias smiled faintly. "Because understanding is stronger than force," he replied. "Connection is stronger than fear. Survival is not just about being alive, it is about teaching, learning, and guiding." Elias understood that this was the moment the queen had been testing for. Would he prioritize survival alone, or would he protect, teach, and connect? Humans had always survived by choosing connection, even when danger loomed. Suddenly, a subtle shimmer in the chamber signaled the approach of rival factions. They had tracked the child's attachment to him, intending to intervene. Elias did not panic. He analyzed the situation quickly. The rival aliens moved with precision, but humans had an advantage in unpredictability. He whispered to the child, guiding it behind a low crystal outcropping. Together, they used the terrain to obscure their presence. The rivals paused, confused by the disappearance of their target. Elias seized the moment, moving subtly along another path, the child following perfectly. Human ingenuity, observation, and adaptability had turned the tide. The rivals eventually gave up, retreating into the shadows. Elias exhaled, knowing that the queen had observed every step. Humans survived by thinking, not fighting. At last, they reached the center of the chamber. The queen stood still, her eyes glowing softly. Elias and the child faced her together. "You have survived," she said, "and you have taught another to learn to adapt and to trust. Few beings could accomplish what you have." Elias nodded. Humans survive by understanding, not by strength, by teaching, not by domination, by connection, not by fear. The Queen had acknowledged not only his survival but the humanity that had guided every choice, every risk, every lesson shared with the child. The child's eyes glowed brightly, stepping closer to Elia's. He reached out, placing a hand lightly on its small form. Trust, empathy, and intelligence had bridged worlds, and now they were stronger together. Elias realized that humans were remarkable not because of brute strength, but because of courage, creativity, and the ability to teach and connect, even across species. The Queen's presence began to fade, a signal that the test was over. Elias led the child toward the chamber's exit, carefully moving past the attendants who now regarded them with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Outside, the alien landscape stretched endlessly before them, the twin suns casting long shadows across jagged rocks and shimmering plants. Elias breathed deeply, feeling the thrill of survival and the quiet joy of connection. "Stay close," he whispered to the child. It responded with the soft, repeating sound, glowing faintly. Elias knew that together they would survive. Together they had proven something extraordinary. Humans survived because they adapted, reasoned, and connected. And now that spark had extended beyond his own species. As they moved toward the distant horizon, Elias reflected on the journey. The Queen had underestimated him once, but she had also provided the greatest challenge, teaching another being to think, to learn, and to trust. Humans had always survived by facing challenges head-on, by observing, reasoning, and adapting. Now those same qualities had ensured not only his survival, but the growth of another intelligent being. The alien planet stretched endlessly before them, full of mystery, danger, and possibility. Yet Elias felt no fear. Humans had survived the impossible, and their resilience had proven itself again. The child ran slightly ahead, then turned back, glowing faintly and calling his name. Elias smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond relief. Trust, empathy, and shared intelligence had forged a bond that would endure, no matter the distance or challenge ahead. Finally, they reached a small ridge overlooking the valley below, and Elias spotted the faint outline of his ship. Relief washed over him, but he did not rush. Humans had always survived by moving carefully, observing every detail and thinking several steps ahead. He approached slowly, the child at his side, ready for the final step of their journey. When they reached the ship, Elias paused, letting the child take in the sight. The vessel was battered but functional, a symbol of human resilience. He knelt slightly, speaking softly. "We're almost home," he said. The child made the soft sound again, a voice of trust and recognition. Elias realized that humans survived not because they were strongest, but because they could connect, teach, and adapt. That spark, that ingenuity, would carry them forward. As the ship lifted off the alien surface, Elias watched the planet shrink beneath them. The Queen's presence lingered, distant but observant, a silent acknowledgement of human ingenuity and courage. He felt pride, not in conquest, but in survival, connection, and the triumph of empathy and intelligence. The child sat quietly beside him, glowing faintly, eyes reflecting the stars ahead. Elias smiled, realizing that this journey had proven more than survival. It had proven the extraordinary power of humanity. Humans survived because they observed, reasoned, adapted, and connected. And now they had ensured that another being from another world had learned the same. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, Elias felt hope. The journey had been perilous, the challenges immense, and the dangers real. Yet through intelligence, empathy, and courage, humans had survived. And the child, once an observer, now a learner and companion, would carry that spark forward. Together, they had turned a test into triumph. Together, they had shown the Queen, and perhaps the galaxy, that humanity's greatest strength lay not in power, but in its mind, its heart, and its ability to connect across worlds. And as the ship moved toward the distant horizon, Elias knew one truth above all. Humans survived because they could think, adapt, teach, and love. No alien intelligence, no matter how vast or patient, could ever fully predict the power of a human heart. The journey was far from over. New worlds awaited. New challenges would come. But Elias and the child, united in trust, intelligence, and courage, were ready. Humanity had survived again, and in the process it had forged a bond that would endure across stars.